Today I'm replacing front brake pads and rotors on a 2004 Acura MDX. First thing I want to do is set the emergency brake and jack up the front and take the front wheels off. The lug nuts are 19mm, the caliper bolts are a 14, and then the caliper bracket bolts are also a 19. So first, so it's easier for me to get the caliper brackets loose, I pry a screwdriver in here and start to decompress the caliper. Then I've got to take these two 14mm bolts out. In order to get the rotor off, there's these two Phillips screws holding it on. What I use is an impact screwdriver. This guy, if you smack it with a hammer, then it turns it tightly without stripping out the Phillips head screws in there. Once I've got the caliper up out of the way, just be careful when you're loosening it because the brake pads have these hold down springs and they can go flying and get lost pretty easily. So I'm going to pull these out and transfer them to the new pads. Pay attention also to which brake pad has the wear clip in. See how this guy goes inside on the upper. You want to make sure that you put everything back together the way it came apart. These screws are loose. You might have to tap the rotor with a hammer to get it loose off the hub. Some of the rotors have an extra screw here where you can thread in bolts to press the rotor loose. This guy doesn't, so hopefully I'll just be able to hammer it off lightly. Next, I need to take these two 19mm caliper bracket bolts loose. Some new rotors come with a light film on them. You want to spray this down with brake clean and wipe it off so you don't have any smoke or smell from your new brakes. Make sure when you slide your new rotor on that you have these screw holes in the right place. If you put them on the wrong lug nuts, then you won't be able to put the screws in. See how these rotors have these two bolt holes? Sometimes the rotor gets rusted or stuck on the hub. In that case, if you have these two holes, you can thread a bolt in there, tighten it down until the rotor pops loose. Once you have the new cleaned rotor installed with the screws tapped into place, then you can put the caliper bracket back on. Before you do that, you want to make sure that these slides move freely. You might take them apart and lube them up if it feels like they're binding a little bit. If they get stuck, then they'll wear your brake pads unevenly. I've got the caliper bracket back in place and the new pads in with the clip on the inside upper where it was. Before I can put the actual caliper in, I've got to depress the pistons back in place. I usually use an old brake pad with my pliers so that I can protect the caliper pistons and not scrape it up. Especially this caliper that has two pistons. If I press one side, the other side will just pop out. So make sure that you compress these all the way until they're flush so that you can fit them over the fat new pads. Now that I have both pistons compressed all the way in so that they're flush, I can go ahead, put the spring clips in place, and then bolt the caliper back on. Make sure if you twist the caliper up out of your way that the brake hose is not twisted when you're going back together. See how I can peek down there and make sure my clips are where they need to be. Once I slide it over, I can put the bolts back in. These caliper slides have a square piece right here that lock against the caliper bracket so they don't just spin. Now that I have it all back together, I can put the wheels on, torque them to spec. Before I go anywhere, you want to sit inside the car and pump up the brakes. That will pump the pistons back out so that you don't drive across the street into your neighbor's house on your first attempt at braking. Alright, so I got everything back together, wheels back on, looked up the lug nut torque for this vehicle. It's 80 foot-pounds, so I go around and torque all of the wheels, then I road test, then I re-torque the wheels. I always torque twice because, especially when I have the brakes apart, sometimes the rotors will feel like they're on there tightly enough, but a road test will have them actually sit back into place and your lug nuts could loosen up. I don't ever want anybody's wheel to pop off, so safety first, road test and torque again. Also on my first road test, backing out very slowly, pumping the brakes, making sure I'm gonna stop before I head out into the streets. And on the road test, just making sure everything's quiet, braking smoothly, looking good. You also want to check your brake fluid level. Most people don't top off the level because it shouldn't really be messed with, and taking the cap off can allow dirt and grime into your brake fluid, which is the last thing you need. But if people have topped off your brake fluid, when you squeeze the calipers together, it can make that fluid level rise and overflow, and you want to make sure that you don't have any mess. That's it.